Good afternoon, everyone. In the last lecture, we finished up talking about Aquinas on natural law. We saw how the natural law is, in general, the same for everyone, but also that it may vary depending on the circumstances of the action. This should not be surprising to us coming out of Aristotle, who says the same thing from a slightly different perspective, as we've seen. We also talked about ways in which we can be ignorant of certain points of the natural law, even the ones that are the same for everyone. And we saw how to think about situations in which not just the individual may be ignorant of the natural law, but even the lawmakers who might make human laws that are not in keeping with the natural law and eternal law. These laws, as Augustine and Aquinas say, are not laws at all. And finally, we saw how Martin Luther King, Jr. uses this framework of natural law to add a natural consequence that follows from what Augustine and Aquinas said. If unjust laws are not laws, we're not required to obey them. In fact, we have a duty to disobey them. Okay, let's move on to what you read for today. Now, there couldn't be a starker contrast with Aquinas than Hobbes, but you'll see them using the same language on occasion. The meaning, however, is very different, as you may have noticed. So, for example, Hobbes begins by talking about equality. We are by nature equal. Now, this sounds very lofty and good until you realize what he means by equality. He says, "The weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, whether by secret machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with himself." Now, this pretty much sets the tone for where he's going. We're entering into a world that, by nature, consists of solitary individuals who are naturally in a state of conflict with the other individuals. There might be a sort of teaming up, as he suggests, but this will only be done for defense against others, and only when it's in our interest to do so. Now, we call this state that we begin with in our philosophical reflection the state of nature. It's an imagined state of what human beings are really like outside of social convention. In other words, we're trying to get at the physis, the nature of man, by abstracting him out of nomos, social convention. You'll notice that for Hobbes, we don't even begin in a family or any other social structure at all. We begin as autonomous individuals. Now, many modern philosophers will describe the state of nature for man. The most famous and influential philosophers to do so are probably John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who you'd likely read in any class on political philosophy, or political theory for that matter. Now, Locke was an extremely important thinker for the founding fathers of our country. In fact, if you go to Monticello in Virginia, the home of Thomas Jefferson, you'll see a portrait of John Locke hanging up over his doorway. And Locke was, in many important ways, just a softening up of Hobbes. So much of Hobbes remains in the American mind as a result, as hopefully will become clear. Now, in our study of Hobbes, we want to first get a clear sense of what human beings are like, since this will determine what our state of nature is. Next, we want to see what the state of nature is like. And finally, we want to understand how we leave the state of nature and enter into social and political relationships with others. So first, let's look at what human beings are like. Now, Hobbes is what we call a psychological egoist. And this means that he thinks that everything that each person does is only for the sake of furthering his own interests. And I mean everything. So what is it that we're after? Well, just like Aristotle said, Hobbes says we are pursuing our end. And what is our end? Happiness, right? Wrong. Hobbes says the end for human beings is, quote, principally their own conservation and sometimes their delectation only. So what we want to achieve most is bare survival, which is hard enough considering our natural state, as we'll see. But it's not just survival we're after. We also want things for delectation, that is, enjoyment, pleasure. So we pursue the things we want, the things that will give us pleasure. What if the things we want already belong to another person? Well, it's expected that we'll try to take the things we want from the people that already have them, by uniting with others if necessary. Hobbes says, if one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life or liberty. So in other words, we might see this teaming up to come take whatever another person has or has made, has built. But if we finally obtain what we want in this way, it's just as likely that others will come and try to take it from us. This results in what Hobbes calls a state of diffidence, that is, the opposite of confidence, insecurity, or uncertainty. When faced with this diffidence, the only remedy seems to be what Hobbes calls anticipation of others' evils. We have to get them before they get us, if we want to enjoy the things we desire. Further, if we desire glory, we may invade our neighbors just for the sake of conquest, not even because we need or even desire what they have. Now, it's no surprise that Hobbes thinks that we naturally have an aversion to other people. He says, men have no pleasure, but on the contrary a great deal of grief in keeping company, where there is no power able to overawe them all. So here we see an anticipation of what the solution is going to be. The only thing that can keep us in check is a power much stronger and terrible than any evil that we can inflict on each other. Now, this is going to be the government, as we'll see in a little bit. But now let's take a look at what the state of nature is like, given the way that we are as human beings. You can probably take a pretty good guess. It's a state of war of all against all, the bellum omnia contra omnes, as it's known in Latin. It results in a state of nature that Hobbes famously describes as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Some people have wondered whether Hobbes was describing himself here. Actually, somewhat surprisingly perhaps, Hobbes was known to be quite agreeable and hospitable. You'd never guess it from his philosophy. Anyway, you can see how these characteristics fit our life in the natural state for Hobbes. We're all by ourselves, except for utilitarian alliances that we might form with others. But can we even trust them when our back is turned? Everybody is poor, at the very least in an economic sense, since industry and commercial development are impossible under these dangerous conditions. It's nasty and animal-like, brutish, because there can be no development of the arts or sciences or anything else. And these are some of the things that make us distinctly human. And of course, our life is short. It's not likely to last long under these conditions either. Now, one last thing that we should note about the state of nature is that Hobbes says that, quote, the notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have there, in the state of nature that is, no place. Why is this? Because, he continues, where there is no common power, there is no law, no injustice. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. So let's pause here. what we're seeing is a stark contrast to what we saw in Aristotle, and especially in the natural law theory of Aquinas. There we were bound, remember, law means binding, we were bound by the dictates of human reason, natural law, which was able to discern God's eternal law. Whether these dictates of natural law were made into human laws or not, they were still binding. Here in Hobbes, right and wrong are completely determined by the laws of the political community. Where there is no political community, and therefore no laws, there's no possible sense of right and wrong, good and evil. In other words, human laws, in Aquinas' terminology, is all there is. So let me introduce another term that we use in philosophy and legal theory for human law. Let's call it positive law instead. Now, positive here refers not to positive rather than negative, but positive in the sense of posited or set down. Where there's no law set down by a governing body, as is the case in the state of nature, anything goes. There is no such thing as wrong or evil. As he says, force and fraud are the cardinal virtues. The only rule is to get what you can and hold on to it as long as you can by any means necessary. Now let's talk about leaving the state of nature. Now this is a very bleak picture that he's giving us. Is there any hope? Yes. As we've already anticipated, introducing a third party to arbitrate our disputes is the only way to peace. As Hobbes describes in chapter 14, we can transfer our natural rights to a governing body. Now this is the most basic move in what's become known as social contract theory. In Hobbes' version, the natural rights that are transferred are to take whatever we wish, to protect what we have by any means necessary, and to punish anyone who offends us. We agree, make a contract, that's what we call social contract theory. We make a contract to lay down our rights in order to seek peace, or at any rate, an end of the state of war. Now the only way this is going to work is if I and everyone else are more scared of what the government is going to do to us than we are scared of each other. The whole thing runs on fear for Hobbes. The title of the work, in fact, is called Leviathan, a sea monster described in the Old Testament of the Bible. The idea is that we need to come together to unite to form a terrifying beast, the government, that will keep us from killing each other. This is our only hope, given how human beings are. Now, once again, this is a very bleak picture of human nature. But Hobbes thinks that this view is what he calls confirmed by experience. He thinks that there's some indication that this is the way human beings actually are, or would be, in the state of nature. So let me just read what he sees as proof. A couple sentences here on page 85. It says, this is confirmed by experience. Let him therefore consider with himself, when taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chests. And this, when he knows there be laws and public officers armed to revenge all injuries that shall be done to him. What opinion has he of his fellow subjects when he rides armed? Of his fellow citizens when he locks his doors? And of his children and servants when he locks his chests? Does he not here much accuse mankind by his actions, as I do by my words? So you hear what Hobbes is citing as proof. Even in a world where we do have laws, we do have, there is a police force to call, there is a military to keep peace. Even in this a world where there is convention. We're not in a state of nature anymore. We still lock our doors, and we take an updated version of what he's saying, take our cell phones with us when we travel in case anything happens. We need to call the police. Or even, in today's circumstances, I suppose, carry a weapon if it's legal. Think about the conceal and carry laws that many people defend. Isn't this just like Hobbes says? Isn't this an accusation of mankind by actions, as he says? Okay, we'll leave it here for today. Next class, we'll skip ahead in the modern period to David Hume. I'll talk to you then.